Awesome. So that's all how it's supposed to work. There's then the other side of the coin is what happens when something affects you in your life, when life comes up and prevents you submitting an assessment on time. Well, now you go through what's called an adverse circumstances process. You've probably seen systems like this before. It may be a little bit different here. So again, let's hit the highlights. This is straight from the documentation, what does and doesn't count as adverse circumstances. Health grounds, physically or psychologically ill, counts as adverse circumstances in some cases, but it's certainly something that can qualify you for adverse circumstances. It's not the only thing. Compassionate grounds, you lose a close family member, you lose your job, get kicked out of home, have a car accident, even if you're not injured, all of these things can count as adverse circumstances, as can anybody into the armed forces who is, required to go somewhere or do some training, or a volunteer firefighter, stuff like that. All of this may count as adverse circumstances. Some things that definitely don't count, things like work doesn't count. There is an expectation that university is your full-time job, and work around that does not count for adverse circumstances. I understand that may be very difficult for some of you who need to work. Discuss that stuff with your course coordinator, but no, officially work doesn't count. Either as holidays, the fact that your parents booked a 2-week holiday and I'm sorry, but it doesn't count as adverse circumstances. And nor does you making a mistake and not staying up to date with your course information and all that kind of stuff. If you do have something happen that you think qualifies as adverse circumstances, you must submit the adverse circumstances that day, okay? You don't wait 2 or 3 days later and then submit. That should be automatically denied. You are to submit if it's a quiz, you need to do it basically before the quiz officially ends. You don't submit your quiz and then go and do adverse circumstances. You bail out and you do your adverse circumstances instead. And if it's an assignment, you put it in that day. It's not always going to be possible, I know that, but that's the expectation, all right? So work to that. Also note, may or may not be accepted. If you were sick for 3 days on an assignment that you had 12 weeks to do, that's not going to be considered adverse circumstances. That's just going to be like, well, you should have, it was 3 days out of 12 weeks. No, get it done. So be aware that not everything will necessarily be accepted out of hand. We're generally pretty good with it, but, and the other side of it is not everything necessarily grants an extension of time. So you may have had adverse circumstances and it may have legitimately affected your preparation. We may agree on that fact. Great. My solution is not necessarily give you an extra 3 days to do it. It may be submit what you have now and I will mark it with consideration of time lost. Okay? Or with consideration of circumstance, because it's not always lost time. And that's actually a really good outcome for you a lot of the time, because it kind of takes workload away from you in a time when you're probably already pretty stressed. So that's a good thing for you. But yeah, be aware, it's not always going to be an extension. At least in 1500, it will almost always be submit what you have now, and I'll mark with consideration of circumstance. The other time that this happens is if ever you've got to give a demonstration or a presentation. If you have to do public speaking as part of the assessment, you need a room of 30 people to do public speaking in, so you present on that day whether your preparation was affected or not, and that can be taken into consideration in your marking criteria. Cool. Covered all of that. Okay, so mandatory attendance. This is a thing. There's another video that talks about attendance in the playlist. Watch that if you haven't. But as somebody doing a first year subject, you're required to attend 80% of your classes, meaning generally you can miss 2. And if you miss a third one, you automatically fail the course. The rule currently goes in terms of adverse circumstances, like what if I'm sick? Well, if it's your first 2, you don't put adverse circumstances in for that because you're going to be okay regardless. And then if you're sick a third time, then you put adverse circumstances in for that to say this is my reason for missing class, please don't fail me. The kind of problematic loophole with this is if you're sick on the first 2 and you just sleep in on the third one and you don't have any documentation for this, you might be up the creek without a paddle. Talk to your course coordinator. Don't necessarily throw adverse circumstances in, but when you're sick, just let your course coordinator know. I personally, and maybe a few other course coordinators, we're going to just have a Google form that you can chuck this information in. It saves it cluttering up the AC system, which is not built to do this. So yeah, we'll have some other systems in place. But you don't need to smash in adverse circumstances just because you missed 1 week in a first 1000 level course. The other one is catch-up quizzes and exams. So if you're legitimately sick on a day, or you have a car accident, whatever, on a day with a quiz or an exam, you can put adverse circumstances in and do a supplementary or a catch-up. This will generally result in a new quiz being written for those of you who are doing that. Couple things to bear in mind, there will be one catch-up. If you miss that, regardless of circumstance, you get a 0. So it's a one shot for a catch-up. The other one is when we rewrite that second assessment, our goal is to make it of equivalent difficulty as the first one, but we're not going to make it easier because that would be inequitable, right? You can't make a secondary catch-up quiz easier than the first one. So we will try our best to be equal difficulty, but I'm not making it easier for you. So, you know, wherever you can, attend your quiz as scheduled. And if you can't, you can do a catch-up, but talk to your course coordinator. But, you know, don't think your life's going to get easier because of that. And I've mentioned this a few times. I want to reiterate it. Talk, at least in my case, not all course coordinators do this, but please talk to me before you put in adverse circumstances in for Eng 1500, because 98% of the time, I can get a much, much better resolution with you by having a quick chat to you than we can by putting anything through the system. We may still put stuff through the system to make a paper trail, but the conversation gets you a far better solution than blindly putting something into the AC system that may get rejected for a whole host of reasons or just produce a bad outcome for you. So talk about it if you can. You're not always going to. Occasionally there's going to be things that make you uncomfortable talking to me. That's fine. That's why this system exists. But otherwise, please talk to me. I'm sure we can get you an awesome solution that, you know, takes care of a lot of your troubles. Because most of the time somebody putting in adverse circumstances is probably fighting on a few fronts, and there's probably other ways we can help you. All right, this slide's only going to be for a select number of you. I do want you all to know that this exists, but I'm going to spend a minute or two on this, then we're going to get back to some other stuff. So, RAPs, elite athletes and placements. An RAP is a reasonable adjustment plan. This is for people who know that they're going to have things that come up and affect their ability to complete a course. Maybe you're dyslexic. Maybe you've got ASD, you're a bit autistic. Whatever it is that you know comes up for you, you can go to accessibility, and there's a whole host of things that accessibility can help you with. If you're struggling on a whole heap of different fronts, go there, talk to those people. They can get you something. One of the bits of support they can offer is a reasonable adjustment plan, which is a documentation that comes to me as a course coordinator and says, you know, this person needs all of their things printed on blue paper so that they can read it easier. Fine, whatever, we can do that for you, no dramas. So go through that process if this is a thing that concerns you. You don't have to utilize your RAP necessarily. Some people, it's enough to simply know that they have one and just they've shared it with their course coordinator, and then it's never a problem. You do need to give them to your course coordinator as soon as you get them, all of your course coordinators. So something that says, you know, I have an adjustment plan and it's meant to do blah, 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 and you pull it out after an assignment is due, that's going to get denied. You've got to get it to your course coordinator as soon as possible. Partly because it helps from an administrative perspective, but also there's huge things that I can reshuffle under certain circumstances to make your life easier if you give me enough warning. If you just pull it out because you were late on something, it's not the way you want that conversation to go. And the major one, the thing that causes the most problems is RAPs are often ambiguous. They state something like may require an extension of time, which you may consider as, I'll get a 3-week extension, and I may consider as, I will give you 1 hour. And you do not want to end up in this ambiguity boat with a course coordinator on a major assessment, right? And also, may require an extension of time. Not does, may. You may just get that denied out of hand. So have these conversations with your course coordinators early, saves you all the trouble. We almost never have problems with people who we communicate early with. We almost always can get them an awesome solution, and then they can have a good time. Cool. So I keep saying you should discuss it. I understand that not everybody's going to enjoy discussing these types of things with Big Scary Dylan or whatever that it is. That's totally fine. You can bring a support person with you to one of these types of meetings. This is not uncommon. And then they can sort of advocate on your behalf, or they can actually attend the meeting entirely in your stead. I've not actually done that before, but I know that that's a thing that can exist. You can have one of these people there to advocate for you to de-escalate some of that confrontational nature of the thing. But normally, we're all pretty good with it.